My name is Robert Mac Eustace Jones. I'm from Zuni and Cochiti Pueblo. I've been making jewelry since I was about 10. I consider myself to be a metalsmith more so than a silversmith because I will actually use a lot of different metals in my work. I use a lot of different stones. I don't limit myself with my artwork. I started when I was 10 years old, but there are photos of me sitting on my father's lap as a baby while he was soldering and making jewelry. So like you could technically say I started as an infant, but not until I was about 10, like seriously. And I remember the first pieces that I made, my parents taught me basically how to use the pliers and hammer. And the hammer technique was the first technique I ever learned. And that's just basically taking a ball peen hammer and hammering. And it's still a technique that I use today because it's one of my favorite effects to give silver that. It gives silver a lot of movement. And so I still incorporate that technique in my work. But it was also fun. It was a way to get me interested in actually making jewelry at a young age because making jewelry can actually be very difficult. But you give a 10-year-old a ball peen hammer and say hammer, that's fun. So it really sort of introduced me to making jewelry in a positive way. And from there, I started experimenting with some different ideas and different concepts. And I remember distinctly my mom telling me some of the designs I came out with that I was not going to be able to make that. She said, that's going to be too complicated for you. And so behind her back, when I wasn't supposed to be in the workshop, I would go in there and I would work and I would show up with this piece and say, look, Mom, look what I made. And then after she reprimanded me, she'd be like, I can't believe you actually made that. That's amazing, because I didn't think that that was going to work. So my mom was the one who actually taught me. She was brilliant. The lessons that she taught me are actually amazing. I think back all the time about how smart she was and how much she gave to me and how much knowledge she gave to me. And at the time, I didn't even realize that she was giving me this knowledge. She would come up with like these really amazing designs, and her thing was work smarter, not harder. She would come up with these designs that were super simple and elegant and beautiful, and people would just fall in love with them. But the problem was, since they were simple, it was easy for other people to actually steal those designs. So it was difficult for her. She was always having to recreate herself, reinvent herself, coming up with new ideas and new concepts and new designs. I think it's important to try to hold on to a style and get well known for that style in a sense. This is a problem that I faced. I can't do the same stuff over again. Once I get bored of it, like something in my body and my soul and my mind says, okay, I'm done with this. And so I will be in the middle of a project and I'm like, I'm done with this. And I'll just move it off of the board and I'm like, oh, this is my new project. And I'll move to that new project. It's not forced whatsoever. It comes really naturally. And so the way my mind works, I'll have like 5 or 6 ideas in my head at any one time. And I'll be like making sketches. And the thing with making jewelry too, there's an engineering aspect to it. So just because you come up with a really cool design doesn't mean that you can just sit down and make it. So part of that is there's a process that you work up here as much as you work with your hands. So sometimes I'll come up with an idea and I won't work for 2 or 3 days because I'm up here thinking about how am I going to make that work? How am I going to do this, And I'll assemble the piece again and again and again in my mind before I actually come in the workroom, so I can kind of think through all of the problems that I might have as I work on it. And sure enough, as I work on it, those problems happen and I'm like, oh yeah, I know how. How was I thinking I was going to fix this, or how was I thinking I was going to do that? And I'll look for the right tool, and I don't use tools the way they're meant to be used. I use them in creative ways. So I'll be like, oh, okay, this is how I got to do this, right? And the whole process, I never know if I'm actually going to finish the piece because it might collapse and fall apart, at the final stage, right? So you might have, 100 hours invested in something and then it falls apart. So that last, I'd say the last 3 or 4 steps, I'm praying. I'm like, okay, I hope this stays together, and I'll be working on it and hoping and praying, and more often than not, it actually, I'll actually finish it. And then I take what I learned from that experience, and then I'll look at the piece and I'll say, okay, this is nice, but how could it be better? And I'll look at it and I'll say, okay, this is what I can do. So I learn from that process. So it's constantly that, you learn and then the next piece I'll apply that new information to the next piece. And I do this until I get to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm bored now, and then I'll go on to the next. So that's kind of the way I do it. And this is ever since I was a kid. I can't remember any time where I wasn't trying to push myself to do something that I had never done before, and always pushing my limitations. Yeah, constantly. Yeah, I'm very aware of that. One of my favorite pieces was imagined landscapes, and something that I'm trying to kind of play around with is the techniques that are used in Native American jewelry. You know, you have your filing, your stamping, your sawing. You know, there's kind of like a sort of like a mechanical toolbox a lot of Native people will use for their artwork. I'm trying to think outside of that box. So what I've been trying to play with and do is it's sort of like a whole geological sort of technique. And what I'm doing within that technique is I'm applying, just like in geology, I'm applying a lot of heat and a lot of pressure. And I'm letting the silver work organically. So silver obviously is a mineral, which is it's a natural mineral. So I find when you add heat, when you add pressure, it does some really interesting things, and it's very like, yeah, geological, like sort of landscape. So that's something I've really been invested in a lot, and I'm sort of setting my stones in a new way too. So rather than doing the traditional type of inlay, what I'm doing is with these landscape bracelets is after the landscape is formed, I'm finding the places where the rough stones fit, and I'm inlaying the rough stones into these crevices. So again, those are natural resources. So you have like the turquoise like in sort of like it's a vein of turquoise here, or like a vein of sugilite here, of gaspiite. And so I'm putting a bunch of different stones like inlaying into these crevices that the bracelet creates. So in my knowledge, I've never seen anything done like this before. So, and this is something that is uniquely like my idea that I'm still working with. So the landscape series that I'm working on right now is like super exciting.